This is the final word. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon. We are off to Riyadh, sort of. Not anytime soon.
Better not.
But the game's going to Riyadh. This is kind of in that category of,
we used to have Snowtown.
Yeah. There's no town like there used to be a category on the pod a couple of years ago just simply titled "The World Is Fucked." Well, this would meet the criteria there. Yep. So this was I loved Chris Barrett back-breaking big cricket yarns. This is my inside baseball here, but he was one of the great cricket roundsmen and has since moved into investigation roles, having been a foreign correspondent between times. And this is a big story in the Sydney Morning Herald on Saturday. So the idea, Jeff, you can jump in a second, pad out what I miss. But there's often in T20 franchise discourse a discussion around the tennis Grand Slams and the golf majors and trying to have something similar with cricket. And by that, like having chunks of the year where the whole world is watching these T20 tournaments. And this Saudi Arabian proposition is and this is where I had to laugh, that one of the lines in the story referred to them saying that this will help the sustainability of Test cricket, but it will be new to the schedule, which is already overflowing and been at breaking point for a generation. So it's not to say this would replace any of the existing T20 tournaments. It's not to say it would preclude teams from playing international cricket, but yet somehow we're meant to squeeze in 4 more city-based franchise tournaments per year, plus a final, which I'm sure would be in Riyadh, where you would have teams, one representing each of 8 nations. So as was put in an analysis piece by Dan Brettig today, it'd be New York versus, say, Sydney versus London versus Riyadh versus Mumbai versus whatever. And this would be new cricket. And it's to be bankrolled by, you guessed it, the Saudi Arabian operation to the tune of $500 million. So there's Australian links to this. Neil Maxwell, who's a player agent, manages Pat Cummins, his brainchild for over a year. I say his brainchild. He's been involved in the thinking behind this. The ACA have been involved as well behind the scenes. I don't know. I guess, was this a matter of time, Jeff? We've been talking about the probability of Saudi Arabia getting more directly involved in franchise cricket for ages. We assume the second IPL window that's been carved out by India in October will involve Saudi Arabia at some level. Does this mean that it will be a union between the Saudis and Indian capital to create an even bigger T20 franchise operation where the two are in sync and at the expense of Test cricket? That feels like the most likely scenario to me, but all of these various unknowns are pretty scary.
It sounds to me like this is an attempt by, and the fact that the Australian Cricketers Association is involved, so this isn't CA, but this is the Players Union. It sounds like an attempt to try to have some level of influence on the direction of that money because it's going to be coming anyway. So if you accept the inevitability that this torrent of cash will wash through the sport at some point, flash flood style, you go, what preparations can you make to try to channel that flood in the direction that might be least damaging or that might actually end up being advantageous to you at some level? And if you've got a stake in it already, I mean, even the step of having a players' union having some sort of influence in the direction of T20 money is unprecedented, because the T20 revolution, the engine, is being driven by India, which doesn't have any players' unions and doesn't believe in unionisation. So that in itself is interesting to me. The fact that Australian agents are involved in it suggests the same sort of thing of wanting to try to have some influence over it before it happens. But I don't see how the practicalities pan out. The reports, the first report said that they would be using, quote, vacant windows in the existing schedule. Where? What windows? There are no. There is no time in which high level cricket is not being played somewhere around the year. You know, we work in the sport professionally, and we can't cover half the cricket that's happening because it's just too much. We physically can't follow it all. So, what vacant windows? How is that going to work? 4 times a year for what? For 1 week? For 2 weeks? If you're talking majors, you know, but you've got to somehow squeeze in. You've got 8 teams, so you'd be playing 4 matches per round. Are you trying to do that in a straight knockout sort of situation and get it done in 7 or 8 days? How is that possibly going to happen? A lot of that doesn't seem to tally with reality, but I suppose, it comes back to that thing of saying at some point Saudi Arabia is going to throw a bunch of cash at cricket. What if we make the pitch to them first about how to spend it and hopefully get a bigger piece?
Yeah, I think that's it. If you accept the inevitability of this, that you're trying to safeguard against the worst excesses, perhaps have a few more regulations in place to make sure that those involved in it don't get exploited, and try and take some of the hardest edges off. That's the most flattering interpretation of this as to why they'd be involved. And Todd Greenberg, who of course was at the Australian Cricketers Association as their chief executive when this was being talked about initially, and it says in the reports today it was as early as the second half of 2023, and now on the other side of it. So yeah, where India fits in all of this is going to be completely fascinating. So in Bretto's analysis piece today is like, it'll require Mike Baird, who's chairman of CA, and Todd Greenberg, the new chief executive, to almost sell this to India, like to explain to them what might be in their interest.
And the other part of the link that you mentioned briefly is this idea that it will be linked to the funding of Test cricket, that if they could somehow get it agreed upon that some fraction of the money made from this some of that cash would flow to Test cricket. But how is that going to work? You say you've got 8 teams representing 8 countries, but if one of them's New York, well, there's the USA. One of them's Riyadh, there's Saudi Arabia. So that leaves a max of 6 Test playing countries who could be represented. Is Pakistan going to have a team in there? Is there going to be a Karachi team, a Lahore team kicking around in this comp? Wouldn't think so.
Well, do the maths on the reduced World Test Championship that's being mooted, or sorry, the tiered World Test Championship. Well, they'll become your 6 permanent first tier teams, would they not?
Without being too Sydney and +3. Who are the +3?
+3. Yeah, that's right.
Colombo getting the side? Is Bulawayo getting the side? Yeah.
No. No, they're not, because they'll be the less commercially. Maybe Pakistan does, because the prospect of Pakistan-India cricket is such a lucrative one. Even if it was in franchise form, if it was, hypothesising Mumbai versus Lahore, that would be a big ticket event, wouldn't it? So maybe they would get a Guernsey on that basis. But as I said before, a lot of unknowns. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. And from an industrial perspective, I can see where the union, and there's a comment from the ACA in the Bredig analysis piece, where part of their remit is to be crude, get their members as much money as they can, right? Like, from a bargaining perspective. And I guess it's, to use an old political adage, in the tent pissing out better than outside the tent pissing in, maybe. Again, there's so many unknowns here. What's certain is, if this does play out in the way that it's been mooted, it will radically change the way that cricket feels. We've been described as doomsayers on this show, and we're predicting things that will never actually happen. And people have said it to me privately that we go too hard on what will cricket look like in 5 or 10 years. Maybe we haven't been strident enough about predicting what global cricket might look like in a decade from now. Maybe this will be the piece of this that changes everything in ways that would be even inconceivable to what it feels like in 2025. So, and this has been going on clearly for years. The conversations we were having on the show in 2022, when the leagues were being set up and ultimately sold in South Africa and the UAE, that was laying the foundation for something like this. So it's a big watch this space, but we can't naively go from month to month without realising that there is big stuff going down, and the interests that are mostly being served are those who stand to make the most money out of it, not the game at large.
And if something in this structure happens, then effectively that almost becomes T20 international cricket, like bilateral T20 cricket, right? It becomes nation versus nation. If you've got a Sydney team up against a Delhi team or a Mumbai team, then they're quasi-national teams if there's only one representative side in this competition, which means that that franchise is then trying to get all of the best players in Australia, in India, in England to play for, all the best English players to play for the London side, whatever it is. So then how much does that take over, say, T20 international cricket, which probably gets reduced further to just World Cups, which would, that would probably be fine. But how does this all fit in? The IPL's heading up towards 3 months of the year. You need a week or 2 for this tournament 4 times a year. So maybe that's 8 more weeks, 9 more weeks if you factor in a final. Where is the time? Where is this going to happen? And increasingly, what will be the little windows left? Oh, we're going to use this to fund Test cricket. Okay, for who? For how many teams? For how many countries? For 6 of them? For 8 of them? 10? 12?
Well, what it'll mean is Test cricket's played fewer times a year. And look, I know that, and this is the other thing with the ACA, they've been so good at continuing to reinforce the importance and primacy of Test cricket. When Todd was chief executive, when Alistair Nicholson was chief executive, and many before it as well. Like everybody is on the same song sheet when it comes to talking about the need for Test cricket to be supported and protected, and international cricket in turn. But it's how do you do it when there's just no time left? Because a Test series, you can't FIFO, you can't sort of rock up and play a Test the day after you land and piss off to a T20. I suppose you could conceivably do that. But are we looking at, say, 3 windows? If you're looking at a Test championship of 6 teams, 3 series a year of only 2 Test matches and being done back-to-back Test matches in a fortnight and the bare possible bones of it. But then that would compromise the financial model that the ECB and CA have in place, where they make the majority of their money from the TV rights that are sold to Test cricket. So there are all of these various contradictions that need to be worked through one at a time. Jeff, one more tack onto this before we move away. Interesting story yesterday. Corbin Bosch, so South African all-rounder who was, he would say his star is on the rise. He's getting far more of an opportunity with South Africa in recent times. Now, he was going to play in the PSL. He'd signed a high-level contract in January in the draft, but then the Mumbai Indians had an injury. Had room for a replacement player. I'm not sure if it was an injury or a player who was no longer available. So they've gone to Bosch to recruit him. He said yes, and because the IPL and the PSL cross over this year, because the Champions Trophy ate up when the PSL would ordinarily be, which is roughly now. Now Bosch stands to be taken to court by the PCB, who've sent him a legal letter. So I'm not sure where that goes exactly, but this is the world we're in at the moment, where players understandably are trying to do the best they can for themselves in a limited career. And I don't envy the decisions some of these players need to make. But yeah, it's sort of seeing out in this particular tournament with them crossing over how messy it can be when there's territorial claims over the highest talent.
Well, I think if there's one thing that you know for sure, if a player gets offered an IPL contract after they get offered a Pakistan League contract, they're going to the IPL, right?
Yeah.
There is more money to be made, and there is more risk of being blacklisted if you go the other way. So
totally.
I'd be surprised if his franchise hadn't said, "Don't worry about any legal ramifications. We'll foot that bill just on principle that if you want to take something from the PSL, then those teams in that competition would think that they should be able to do that." And fundamentally, it's a better offer. But what's a contract worth in a sporting sense in the modern world? Not very much. Players break contracts all the time. Clubs sell players off before the end of contracts in every sport across every league. So it's not hugely surprising, and it's not like he's one of the biggest names in the sport. But it's a wounded pride bit for Pakistan that they feel like they have to do something. They have to make some sort of gesture in order to try to say you can't just have a precedent of players being able to walk out on us whenever they want.
But one man who won't be playing in the PSL, the IPL, or anything else for that matter until the end of July at a minimum is Mark Wood. This was a story that came out of the Champions Trophy. Ligament damage in his left knee, which required surgery. He'd played such a long stretch of time without major injury. I mean, it's all in context with Mark Wood, of course, but I'm tipping they've got a bit of buyer's remorse now about sending Wood to the Champions Trophy when they could have continued to pick and choose their spots a little bit. I get it, global tournament. I'm not disputing that, but Australia didn't send their best and brightest, and yes, they all had their individual reasons, but they haven't had the rigour of another one-day tournament, and Mark Wood now will be in a bit of a race against time, Jeff. He's got most of the summer on the sidelines. He won't be back in time to play India in those 5 test matches, which will be a big blow in the context of that series. But then what does the ramp up look like for him between then and the first Ashes test, which they will desperately want Wood to be playing in, given that he was the one England player who really did elevate his status when he was in Australia 3.5 years ago. So he's now 36, I want to say. So he's no spring chicken in fast bowling terms. We have seen him be the type of cricketer who comes back from injury and immediately bowls at 95 mile an hour as well. So it's not like this should count against him long term, but every time you have surgery, it makes it that much harder to be at your absolute best. So that's the predicament for Mark Wood.
Sure. I think it would be too simplistic to say that the Champions Trophy is the problem and he shouldn't have gone and played, because if he hadn't played the Champions Trophy and he'd been fit, he would have played a bunch of Test cricket this coming summer. We saw him play a lot of the Test matches last English summer, after the whole move on Anderson so you can play Wokes and Wood thing that we talked about at the time. He played a lot of Test cricket there. He would have played a lot if fit this summer, I'm sure. And he wants to play. He's Mark Wood. He would want to play the Champions Trophy because they had a miserable World Cup, and he would be shitty about that. He would think, well, here's the next 50 over tournament. Here's a chance to try to do something good and to try to drag back a little bit of credibility for that side. So he would have wanted to put in a performance there, and that didn't work either. He would have wanted to play as much Test cricket as he could this English summer ahead of the Ashes. So, in some ways, maybe it works in his favour that he misses these Test matches and can get fit and fresh and ready to go when he comes down to Australia, because he's never a player that England have the luxury of for very long. So it's when do you want Mark Wood? Mark Wood wants to play every time he's available to, but when do England most want and need him to play?
It's an interesting thought experiment in a way. Like, is there a good time to be injured and a good summer to miss? And maybe you're right. He did play 3 tests last summer and a couple in India earlier last year, but that's his lot going back to when he played against Australia in the home summer of 23 when he was so dynamic and so fast. So hopefully
series defining. So they'd want him to be series defining again, do something in the first couple of Test matches of the series in Australia and change the narrative.
He's not long been 35, I should say. So he'll be near enough to 36 when he arrives in Australia, just to get that correct. Just a quick England wrap-up.
He's 35 until he's 36.
Until he's 36. That's it. That's how it works. Into the England wrap-up, which we've done the last couple of weeks. So we're not far from the season beginning. I think the first day of county cricket is the 4th of April, something like that. It's the first round across that weekend in any case. So in no particular order, the 100 draft was last week, and Jimmy didn't get picked up. What are they doing there?
Disappointed with this. Come on, you've got 8 teams. Who cares? Do something. Do something interesting. Do something fun. You think people aren't going to turn on? They'll turn on. I would watch a 100 game if James Anderson was playing. I've never watched one in my life, but I would make an exception for that.
Yeah, I've never watched a ball of it, but I mean, and I don't intend to either, and that's no criticism of the comp. It's just like the same way we don't watch the IPL or the Big Bash. There's only so much cricket you can concern yourself with, and I like to go have a bit of a break during August. But yeah, with Jim, I just sort of thought, like, it's not shirt sales necessarily, but I would have thought that one of the teams would have been prevailed upon by the ECB, get him in there. There's been that tension from the start. Henry Moran's talked a lot about it, written about it as well, where in the early seasons of the 100, what would have they been better doing? Pick players in their late 30s who do a job for you. He used David Weiser as the example. Lower profile gun, David Weiser, or just get Chris Gale out of retirement to play because, that has that own star power, right?
Yeah.
And I know that each individual team, let's use the London Spirit, for example. I know a couple of people that work behind the scenes there. They are desperate to win. The guys and girls that work at the clubs want this to work. But bigger picture, and this has been said by the ECB recently, does anyone else really care outside? I think the people who watch it and consume it, there are no, Welsh Fire ultras, or if there are, you can probably count them on your fingers and toes. So might there have been an opportunity here? There probably was, but yeah,
he should be playing in the Big Bash. I mean, that thing goes for 3 months. Somebody should be signing him up for that at least. That would work. I don't know, up at maybe Brisbane Heat or something, somewhere where the ball's going to do a bit. White ball at night. Yeah, floodlights, bit of humidity. Come on.
He'll be a good signing because what they do now is they've had their draft and the players get sent around. Then they have their injury replacement process, which plays out in the usual way for fast bowlers. He'd be a great sort of, late walk-on. If he starts the season well, I mentioned the start of that domestic season, round 1, Lancashire are playing at Lords against Middlesex. If he tears it up in the county championship and he remains fit, then he'd be a good late addition, and then they might get a few more bums on seats. We will see. At the other end of his career, young James Minto, the Durham speedster who is already hitting the speed radar at like absurd levels. I think he's been clocked at over 90. He's 16. Took a fifer in Zimbabwe the other day in that tour they go on each year, Durham, where they play some list day and first class games down there. So one to watch for this year. I watched him bowl last year at the Oval on his first class debut, and there's like it felt like one of those, I was there, I saw his first professional game moments. So James Minto will get a lot more cricket into him through the season of 2025. Slammin' Sammy Curran is taking over the T20 captaincy at Surrey from Chris Jordan. So Jordan's done that role for 3 years. But Curran, who is the best player at Surrey in T20 cricket, out of favour with England at the moment. Didn't play in the Champions Trophy. It seems like a logical fit with Curran in his mid-20s and trying to find where he sits in the long term. Having a leadership responsibility at a big club that'll get a lot of attention seems like a good sort of medium-term investment from Surrey.
Surely he gets back at some point. You know, it's that, I don't know, you end up in the cricket cliche bucket with the it just makes things happen kind of thing. But it was true with Curran. Like, it was always a bit inexplicable as to how he was able to be as effective as he was at times, especially with his bowling. But it would just work often enough. And yet, you know, overall his numbers never looked that flash in sort of once you take it across a career. But he just had memorable passages of play. He had influential passages of play, and that was bat and ball.
He was player of the T20 World Cup when England won it in Australia back in 2022 and had a big influence on that final as a death bowler. So, yeah, you're right. It won't be long before he's back. But seeing your role there at the Oval, England white ball, staying on that for a moment, there was a really funny bit out of an interview that Rob Key did on BBC following his big press roundtable a couple of weeks ago. So remember he floated that Stokes might be in the frame for the one-day captaincy. I think his line was, they'd be mad not to consider it. After he finished his press engagement, he sent Ben Stokes a message saying, heads up, I've just said in my media commitments that you might be the next England one-day captain. And Key's since relayed that Stokes simply replied with the thumbs up emoji, which is very on brand given, remember in the Ashes in 23, there was that Ashes question mark to Moeen Ali, and Moeen Ali right back with a thumbs up, and that's what ended up the catalyst for Moeen Ali having a final test piece to his career, having retired a couple of years earlier. So I'm not saying it'll happen, but interesting that, you know, England's dealing in emojis, and it's worked before. I don't know. Maybe it'll work again. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, what does it mean? Like, do you think they would genuinely go back to him in that?
I really don't think they will. I really think they'll go, right. You know, the problem is the next white ball tournament is 11 months away, right? The challenge here. So Pakistan played New Zealand in a T20 international overnight, right? And for what it's worth, it's the new Babar Azam era, about the 7th time he's been captain of the Pakistan national team.
I'm glad. I've heard good things about him, promising, good as a stick, apparently.
Yeah. They rolled for 91 at Hagley, and then New Zealand get there easy. Jacob Duffy took a four-for, and the game was won by Seifert and Allen with the bat. Like a long white ball series, T20s, one days, and all. But you're reminded, hang on a minute, there's a T20 World Cup in February next year. So you can't.
But Stokes won't play T20s for England.
Won't he? You know what I mean?
Won't he?
But won't he? You know what I mean? Like, they might just go, okay, then, well, Stokes, why don't you become the white ball captain, see us through to the T20 World Cup, and we'll take a view before we get to the 50 over World Cup, which is might be the following year, 27?
2027, it's after the Ashes.
Man, it sounds bonkers, but
it is bonkers.
Yeah.
After 2027, it's after they've got the 150th anniversary test, potentially a World Test Championship final, 5 Ashes tests, and then they go to South Africa for a World Cup.
Yeah. Other bits and bobs in England, Yuzvendra Chahal is coming back to Northants. Great signing, having that, gun Indian leggy in the mixer. But more importantly, from a final word perspective, Jeff, you like this. We play our final word Oval Dream Boys game every year towards the end of the year. It's September 20. We've already worked out it'll be this year on a Friday night, and we play it at the Dulwich Cricket Club. Normally we play our games across the road for ODB at Elaine's, but we go across the grass to Dulwich. Beautiful club. Jeff, you played there last year and got to enjoy playing a game on that beautiful old ground where David Hooks was the pro famously in the mid-70s. Well, this year the pro at Dulwich is KS Bharat, the Indian wicketkeeper who we were commentating and watching closely as a test player as recently as like 18 months ago. He's going to Dulwich as their pro. So I ponder, can we get him to play for the final word against ODB? And that, will he still be around? Is league cricket still going on
Ranji
on that
Trophy
weekend?
100, KS Bharat.
Yeah.
Might have a couple of them, actually.
So he's off to Dulwich to play in the Surrey Championship. Are they even in the top division? I'm not even entirely sure that Dulwich are in the top flight. They probably are. But, like, my point is they're not They're not winning comps.
It's a modest level
It's club cricket.
For an international,
Yeah.
for a recent Test cricketer to be playing at, and I love that. Like, yes, get involved, be part of it. Like, if there's nothing going on for you back home, KS, get in there. Why not be in England for the summer?
Oh, and on club cricket, Dimith Karunaratne, as he said himself, he's going to be playing club cricket in Melbourne next year. I think he signed for Keilor, so that'll be in the old VTCA where there's always a bob or two bashing around. So
yes,
we'll see how he goes over there.
Not your old club.
No, there was some chat online.
Didn't join the Sri Lankan, the 211s of Sri Lankan internationals.
Well, he did make 100 on debut for Endeavour Hills a couple of years ago, Karunaratne. But no, he won't be. Apparently, he was a terrific clubman in the brief time that he was there playing in the subbies. But he is off to Keilor, I believe. Jeff,
so you're saying we can watch him next summer when we're in Australia. We can go down
see Frank.
To see Big Frank lace a couple through the covers.
I suspect we probably will. Maybe we interview him down there. Jeff, before we go to our break, a bit more going on in Scotland. Now, this is a complicated yarn on Cricinfo that Osman Sami-Udin's done a terrific job documenting what's been happening in Scottish cricket and the racism scandal. I think it's scandal-worthy, that title, over a number of years. We wrote a really long piece last year, which was well worth reading. They can't quite put this behind them. So the allegation from Majid Haq is that there have been multiple different reports and about the latest part of this, and that some of it's been cherry-picked for the official report. Cricket Scotland reject that accusation. But it's more an emblem of the fact that, there'll be he said, she said on this, and I get all of that. But they just can't get beyond it. They just can't get beyond it. So, and obviously Huck is still aggrieved about what happened to him during the 2015 World Cup and the context around him being sent home after he tweeted about his race being a factor in how he was discriminated against, according to him, at the time of being dropped. So, it just feels like, and look, obviously we spend a lot of time in Scotland with the final where we've done the Scottish special a couple of years ago. This might be a conversation that we try and pick up when we're in Edinburgh together in May. Yeah,
Majid Haq has been very strong in pushing for the investigation and in demanding accountability. And Amar Anwar is the lawyer who's worked with him, who's been similarly outspoken throughout. So, my read on it is that those two are registering complaints that the report wasn't released in full and that a summarised version was released, which they think Cricket Scotland tried to influence how the findings were perceived, not having seen the full report and the summarised version. I can't make a call on that myself, but it is significant that the bad blood continues and that this conflict, there hasn't been able to be a resolution between the aggrieved parties and the people who are running the show now, who are largely different to the people who were running the show back then. Yeah, absolutely. And Cricket Scotland were clearly shitty at some of this has been leaked, right? So there's issues internally with what's going on there behind the scenes and who has access to what information and how it's being released, authorised and otherwise. And just on Scotland, before we go to the break, a correction from last week. I said that the European qualifier for the Men's T20 World Cup, which is in July this year in Holland, was a step before the global qualifier. That's wrong, because remember they expanded the T20 Men's World Cup, didn't they? So that's how Uganda came through the process they did last time. That's being replicated. So if Italy can overtake one of Holland or Scotland, they're in. So there isn't a two-stage process for that. I said that last week. They need to enjoy success twice. But that global qualifier is going to, the European qualifier is going to be box office, 5th to the 11th of July. If you're a super cricket badger, then you could do worse things than going over to the Netherlands for that, because, that cricket through that week will have a huge bearing on the immediate futures of the Netherlands, who made it to the Super 12s 2 T20 World Cups ago, Scotland, who came very close to making it to the elimination stage last year, and Italy, who've got a stack of players under the captaincy of Joe Burns, who could easily knock off either of those two. So one to watch in the middle of 2025. Jeff, our final break, and then we've still got quite a bit to get to before we say goodbye.